Welcome to Reform Thinking.
Glad to be here.
So we are doing a deep dive today into something from the middle of the 18th century.
Right.
And it involves a group of Scottish ministers who drafted this document.
Yeah, they basically wrote a literal blueprint for triggering a global societal awakening.
Which is just a wild concept.
It really is.
They packaged this proposal up, put it on a ship, and sent it across the Atlantic Ocean to the American colonies.
And when it arrived, it landed right on the desk of Jonathan Edwards.
Right. And he did not just read it and file it away in a drawer.
No, not at all.
He took it, he analyzed it, and he wrote this meticulous step-by-step manual.
Validating the mechanics of how massive religious movements actually begin.
Yeah. So we were doing a deep dive into Edwards' observations on the text.
Which breaks down a very specific biblical prophecy from Zechariah.
He looks at the grammar, the historical context, and the psychological disposition required to bring a widespread awakening to pass.
It is incredibly detailed.
We are going to take our time today walking through the logic he builds.
Because his argument challenges a lot of our modern assumptions about how cultural shifts happen,
I mean, it is a fascinating piece of historical and theological engineering.
It really is. From the outside looking in, we tend to view massive historical shifts, especially religious revivals, as spontaneous phenomena.
Right. They look totally unpredictable.
But Edwards, looking at the biblical text, argues the complete opposite.
He sees a highly calculated, precise sequence of events.
Yeah, when you examine the actual root causes of a widespread awakening through the lens he provides, nothing is left to chance.
He dissects the prophecy in Zechariah chapter 8 with absolute surgical precision.
Looking at how a future glorious advancement of the church should be introduced.
And he avoids vague spiritual platitudes.
Yes, he wants to nail down the specific mechanisms.
So let us jump right into the first major argument he makes.
Okay.
This centers on the specific duty that precedes this glorious event.
Right, and Edwards identifies this duty as prayer.
But he immediately has to fend off a theological debate regarding how to interpret that word in the text.
Yeah, he notes that some scholars argue the word prayer in this prophecy is meant to be taken as a synecdoche.
Which was a very common rhetorical move at the time, right?
It was. A synecdoche, where a part stands in for the whole, would mean that prayer is just a representative term for all divine worship.
I see.
The argument goes that since animal sacrifices and temple rituals are abolished in the New Testament era, well, prayer just becomes the catch-all word for all Christian religious activity.
Okay, so if you accept that interpretation, then this prophecy is just predicting a general, widespread return to good Christian behavior.
Yeah, people going back to church, singing psalms, avoiding idolatry, living moral lives.
It paints a broad, generalized picture of religious renewal.
But Edwards completely shuts down that broad interpretation.
I want to look at why he does that.
Sure.
Because if we broaden the definition of prayer to mean just living a generally good Christian life,
Right.
we lose the mechanism.
We absolutely do.
Think of it like this. If I call a contractor to fix my roof and ask him to bring a nail gun, and he shows up with a truck full of lumber, measuring tapes, and saws, but no nail gun, he cannot do the specific job I asked him to do.
Right.
He might argue that the nail gun was just a synecdoche for building materials, but the specific task requires a specific tool.
That is a great way to put it.
Edwards is arguing that God is demanding a specific tool for this moment.
And that aligns perfectly with Edwards' logic. He states it appears highly reasonable to suppose that something much more special is intended here.
So he provides two main arguments against the generalized view, doesn't he?
Yeah. First, the text expressly and repeatedly mentions the act of prayer.
It is not just a passing reference.
No, it is the focal point of the prophecy.
Right.
And second, he compares this text with other parallel prophecies that speak of an extraordinary spirit of prayer preceding a day of religious revival.
He points directly to Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, right?
Yes. Regarding the pouring out of a spirit of grace and supplication.
Edwards views that pouring out of a spirit of supplication like a very focused, intense pleading as the required starting point.
He refuses to dilute the specific command into a general category of worship.
Because if you generalize the request, you miss the catalyst.
Spot on. This specific, intense, focused act of prayer is not just one of many good things happening during a revival.
It is the duty that brings the event on.
Yes.
Let me push back on this, playing devil's advocate for a moment.
Okay, go for it.
The Reformers fought hard against the idea of mechanical rote prayer as a means of earning God's favor.
Right, they did.
If we single out one highly specific action extraordinary prayer and say this is the one and only trigger for revival, aren't we risking a return to a works-based mentality?
That is a very fair question.
Doesn't this make revival dependent on human effort rather than God's sovereign grace?
That is a crucial tension in Reformed theology, but Edwards navigates it by focusing on the nature of the prayer itself.
How so?
Well, he's not talking about mindlessly repeating words to unlock a divine vending machine. Right. The extraordinary prayer he describes is a response to a prior work of grace.
So the desire to pray is given by God.
Yes, but the act of praying is the ordained human responsibility.
I see.
Edwards insists on specificity because God works through specific means. General obedience is expected of the Christian at all times, but extraordinary moments in redemptive history are preceded by extraordinary, specific supplication.
God ordains both the ends, the revival, and the means, the prayer.
Precise.
That distinction shifts the focus entirely.
It really does.
If the duty is that specific, we have to look at the specific goal of this duty.
What are these people actually praying for?
Right. Edward says the good that shall be sought by this prayer is the Lord of hosts himself.
This is where the text gets incredibly challenging.
It creates a massive contrast with how we typically view prayer.
It does. Edwards notes the text repeats the phrase, they shall go to pray before the Lord and to seek the Lord of hosts.
He acknowledges that sometimes in Scripture, seeking God signifies seeking the favor or mercy of God.
Which is how most people operate. In a crisis, people look for a favorable outcome.
They want physical healing, financial stability, political peace, or comfort.
Yeah, they are seeking the benefits that God provides.
But Edwards argues that this specific expression of seeking the Lord implies something far beyond asking for favors.
It implies that God himself is the great good desired.
The blessings being pursued are his gracious presence, the blessed manifestations of him, union, and intercourse with him.
In short, it is seeking God's communication of himself by his Holy Spirit.
Let us ground this in a practical reality.
Okay.
Think about a marriage that has grown cold.
That is a tough scenario.
Two spouses might still be running the household efficiently. They pay the bills, they coordinate picking up the kids, they manage the calendar.
Right, doing all the functional stuff.
If one spouse asks the other to pick up groceries, they are seeking a favor, a benefit. But that is completely different from one spouse sitting down, looking the other in the eye and saying, I miss you, I want to spend time with you, I want us to be connected again.
Wow, yeah. Oh, one is seeking a functional benefit and the other is seeking the person.
Edwards is saying this prophecy calls for the church to seek the person of God, not just his functional benefits.
He weaves a brilliant scriptural argument to back this up, pulling heavily from the Psalms.
To prove this intense desire for God himself is the defining characteristic of true faith.
Right. He quotes Psalm 63, where David is in the wilderness.
O God, thou art my God. Early will I seek thee. My flesh longeth for thee, in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory.
The physical environment is desolate. He is literally in a desert.
But his primary request is not for an oasis or rain.
No, his request is for the presence of God.
He follows that with Psalm 73, right?
Yes. Whom have I in heaven but thee, and there is none upon earth that I desire besides thee.
And Psalm 143, where the psalmist earnestly pursues after God, his soul thirsting after him.
Edwards stacks these verses to show a clear pattern.
The true marker of the visible church, according to Psalm 24 and Psalm 69, is that they are the generation of them that seek him.
Your heart shall live that seek God.
The thirsting for the person rather than the provision is what sets this extraordinary prayer apart.
But Edwards introduces a concept here that requires some serious unpacking.
Yes, he talks about seeking a God who had withdrawn or who had hid himself for a long time.
If God is omnipresent, how do we reconcile the idea of him hiding?
Doesn't claiming God hides sound like a convenient excuse for when the church is failing at its job of evangelism?
It really does sound like that at first glance.
We blame our lack of fruitfulness on God's hiddenness, rather than our own apathy.
It could easily be used as an excuse if misunderstood. However, Edwards is making a critical distinction regarding the manifest presence of God.
Okay, explain that.
He is not suggesting a literal spatial withdrawal as if God vacuums himself out of a geographical area.
Right.
He is talking about the visible tokens and fruits of his gracious presence.
So God is always omnipresent, sustaining the universe by the word of his power.
Yes, but he does not always manifest his convicting, reviving spirit in the same visible, palpable way in every era.
So the lights are off, so to speak.
Yeah, the visible evidence of his activity in the surrounding culture is diminished.
Edwards points to historical precedents for this divine withdrawal.
He references Jeremiah 29 dealing with the Babylonian captivity.
That era was characterized by great apostasy, which occasioned God's withdrawal of his manifest favor.
Israel was taken into exile.
But God told them that after 70 years, then shall ye go and call upon me, and I will hearken unto you, and ye shall seek me and find me, when you shall search for me with all your heart, and I will be found of you.
The finding of God equates to the restoration of the church.
He also quotes Isaiah 45:15, Verily thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, the Savior.
And Hosea 5:15, where God says, I will go and return unto my place till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face.
So Edwards builds a framework demonstrating that during low states of the church, during times of spiritual apathy, moral decay, or widespread theological error, God actively withdraws the visible manifestations of his Spirit.
He hides.
And the prescribed biblical response is not to just launch a new marketing campaign or try a different program.
No, the response is to search for him with all your heart.
And when they do, Edwards says God answers.
He quotes Isaiah 58, Then shalt thou cry, and he shall say, Here I am.
That imagery is incredibly striking. The church is crying out in a dark, dry land, and suddenly the voice says, Here I am.
It moves from a hidden state to a plainly seen reality.
It shifts our entire perspective on what a spiritual drought is.
A low state of the church is not just a string of bad luck.
It is often a divine withdrawal designed to provoke a specific reaction.
Right, extraordinary, united prayer seeking the Lord of hosts.
If we accept that premise, then the transition from an individual realizing God is hidden to a massive global movement becomes the next logical hurdle.
How does this spread?
Yeah. Edwards traces a fascinating chronological sequence of how this seeking expands to the masses.
He looks at the participants mentioned in the prophecy, the inhabitants of many cities, countries, and strong nations.
Great multitudes in different parts of the world.
But he notes it does not happen all at once. He meticulously maps out a 6-step chronological sequence based on the text.
Let us walk through this sequence because it reveals a lot about the sociological and spiritual mechanics of how revivals spread in the real world.
Step 1. A spirit of prayer is given to God's people in various places.
The phrasing here is essential. It is given to them.
Yes, it is a disposition planted within them by the Spirit, prompting them toward this specific duty.
So it originates with divine initiative.
Exactly. Spot on. It starts with the believers.
People who are already part of the visible church receive a renewed burden.
Then, step 2. They come into an express agreement to unitedly pray to God in an extraordinary manner.
They coordinate their efforts.
They agree to ask God to appear for the help of his church, to show mercy to mankind, and to pour out his Spirit.
That leads to step 3. This disposition to prayer and the union in it gradually spreads.
It increases to greater degrees.
It moves from one local congregation to another, from one town to the next.
And step 4 is the critical turning point.
With this spreading prayer, a revival of religion is gradually introduced.
But notice, this revival starts strictly among his professing people.
The church itself wakes up first.
There is a renewed disposition to the worship and service of God among those who already profess the faith.
Step 5 is perhaps the most strategic insight Edwards offers regarding how cultural shifts happen.
This visible change in the believers becomes the actual mechanism that awakens the surrounding culture.
Unbelievers, or nominal Christians, observe this palpable change.
Seeing this makes them sensible of the wants of their own souls.
It excites a great concern in them for their spiritual good.
It puts them upon earnestly crying to God for mercy and disposes them to join in that seeking.
This makes me think of a meteorological phenomenon.
Oh, like what?
Let us look at how a thermal updraft works. You have a specific spot on the ground that gets heated by the sun more than the surrounding area.
Okay.
The air above that spot gets hot and starts rising rapidly into the atmosphere.
Right, because hot air rises.
As that column of hot air rises, it creates a low-pressure zone at the surface.
And nature hates a vacuum.
Yes. So that low-pressure zone forcefully pulls in all the cooler air from the neighboring areas.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That surrounding air gets pulled into the center, gets heated, rises, and pulls in even more air.
Eventually, this localized updraft creates a massive, self-sustaining weather system, like a thunderstorm.
Edwards is describing a spiritual updraft.
That physical mechanism maps perfectly onto his sociological observation.
The intense, agreed-upon prayer of a small group of believers creates the initial heat.
As they are revived, their visible transformation creates a spiritual vacuum, a pull on the surrounding culture.
The unbelievers are drawn in, not necessarily by an intellectual argument first, but by witnessing the undeniable reality of God's presence among the believers.
Right.
I want to challenge this sequence a bit.
Let us hear it.
Doesn't this contradict the Reformed idea that only God can regenerate a human heart?
How do you mean?
Well, if we say that the visible passion of the believers is the mechanism that awakens unbelievers, are we giving too much credit to human behavior?
Edwards would argue we are dealing with secondary causes.
Okay, break that down.
The Holy Spirit is the primary cause of any awakening. He provides the initial heat. He regenerates the heart.
Right.
But the Spirit typically works through ordained means. The visible witness of a revived church is the secondary cause, the means by which the Spirit draws the unbeliever.
It is the visible evidence of an invisible reality.
Edwards is simply observing the historical and biblical pattern of how the Spirit chooses to operate.
And that pull is what brings us to step 6.
The awakening reaches the highest stations and entire nations are awakened.
Religion is propagated until there is an accession of many of the chief nations of the world to the church.
He points to Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23 to support this staggering claim.
10 men shall take hold, out of all languages of the nations, of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, We will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.
Think about what that meant to a Jewish audience in the post-exilic period.
They were a shattered, defeated people trying to rebuild a ruined city.
The idea that men from powerful foreign nations would grab their garments begging to join them was absurd.
Yet, the prophecy points to a time when the presence of God is so evident that the cultural power dynamic completely flips.
The men from different languages represent the confusion and division of the nations.
They are all grabbing the garment of one person because they recognize God is with that person.
They are drawn by the undeniable presence. We have heard that God is with you.
Edwards links this to Romans chapter 2, clarifying that Jew, in this context, refers to the true inward believer under the new covenant.
He quotes Psalm 65. O thou that hearest prayer, unto thee shall all flesh come.
It is a breathtaking vision of global renewal, all stemming from that initial coordinated agreement to pray.
But going back to your thermal updraft analogy, a system that massive cannot be sustained without structure.
If the wind shears, the updraft collapses.
Such a massive, coordinated prayer movement across cities and nations requires a highly structured mode of union to survive the inevitable fading of initial emotional zeal.
So if this revival is pulling people in like a thermal updraft, how do you keep it from just dissipating when people get tired?
That is the big question.
How did Edwards propose anchoring this? He spends a significant amount of time detailing how these people unite.
It is not just a vague agreement to pray whenever they feel like it.
He says the mode of their union is a visible union, a union by explicit agreement.
It is a joint resolution declared by one to another.
It is first proposed by some, and then readily and expressly followed by others.
The text says, The inhabitants of one city shall apply themselves to the inhabitants of another, saying, Let us go.
And the response to that proposal requires us to look at the linguistics of the text.
The response is, I will go also.
Edwards addresses a debate over these words.
Some commentators suppose that the words, I will go also, were actually spoken by the person making the initial proposal.
The logic was that the proposer is saying, let us go, and I will go also, to assure the hearers that he isn't asking them to do something he refuses to do himself.
Edwards dismisses that as nonsensical.
The phrase, let us go, already implies the speaker is participating.
Saying, I will go also, immediately afterward is entirely redundant.
He concludes it's far more natural to understand these latter words as importing the active consent of those to whom the proposal is made.
It is the reply of the people falling in with the plan.
It represents the concurrence of great numbers.
To justify this interpretation, Edwards points out a linguistic feature in the biblical text called an ellipsis.
We use ellipses in everyday conversation constantly.
Yeah, give me an example.
If you ask me, want to grab coffee?
Yeah.
And I just say, sure. We both understand the full sentence is, sure, I want to grab coffee.
Right. The subject and verb are dropped, but the meaning is perfectly clear from the context.
Edwards argues the biblical text uses an ellipsis here.
Something is understood that is not explicitly written out with a narrator's tag.
It is as if the text said, those of other cities shall say, I will go also.
He provides several biblical precedents to prove that such ellipses are a standard feature of biblical literature, especially in covenantal language.
Let us look at those examples. He uses Jeremiah 3.22.
God says, "Return, ye backsliding children, and I will heal your backslidings."
The very next sentence is, "Behold, we come unto thee, for thou art the Lord our God."
Edwards points out that the text does not say, "and then the children replied."
It drops the response right in.
The backsliding children are the ones saying, "Behold, we come unto thee."
The immediacy of the response is captured by removing the narrator's interruption.
He finds the same pattern in the Song of Solomon.
Chapter 4 ends with, "Let my beloved come into his garden and eat his pleasant fruits."
The very next verse begins, "I am come into my garden, my sister, my spouse."
There is no narrator saying, "And then her beloved answered."
The dialogue shifts instantly. The proposal is made, and the act of consent, the arrival, is stated immediately.
He also points to Psalm 50. "The heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Hear, O my people, and I will speak."
The judge is suddenly speaking, even though the text did not announce the transition.
Edwards builds an ironclad case that "I will go also" is the active, explicit consent of the people receiving the call to prayer.
This explicit consent mirrors the covenantal tradition within Reformed theology.
We see this in the concept of binding agreements.
But doesn't a formal, explicit agreement to pray sound a bit bureaucratic?
If we draft a document stating we will pray at these specific times for these specific things, doesn't that mechanical structure kill the organic work of the Spirit?
It feels like we are trying to unionize our prayer lives.
That is a common modern concern. But Edwards would argue that the explicit agreement is not meant to replace passion.
No, it is meant to anchor it.
Human emotions fluctuate. Zeal fades.
The initial heat of a revival will always cool down on a purely emotional level.
If you rely solely on spontaneous feelings to sustain a multinational prayer movement, it will collapse within a month.
The visible, explicit agreement binds the will of the people together so that when the emotional high wanes, the resolve remains intact.
It provides the tracks for the train.
Oh, I like that.
The steam is the passion generated by the Spirit, but without the rigid steel tracks of an explicit formal agreement, the train derails into the dirt the moment it hits rough terrain.
The formal treaty sustains the movement through the dry seasons.
And Edwards makes it clear that this formality does not dampen the intensity.
In fact, he spends his next observation focusing entirely on the extreme linguistic intensity required by this agreement.
Let us look at the manner of the prayer itself.
The phrase in the English translation is, "Let us go speedily," or continually.
But Edwards looks at the margins of the translation and notes the literal Hebrew rendering of this phrase.
The literal Hebrew translation is, "Let us go in, going."
That is a fascinating phrase.
It sounds poetic, but it carries a massive amount of weight.
Edwards breaks down the Hebrew linguistic mechanic at play here, known as ingemination.
Ingemination is the doubling of words.
In the Hebrew language, when a word is doubled, it is intended to express a concept very strongly.
It is a grammatical intensifier.
Because ancient Hebrew did not use adjectives like very or extremely in the same way English does.
If they wanted to place weight on something, they repeated the root word.
He explains that it generally implies the superlative degree of a thing.
The classic example is the Holy of Holies, meaning the most holy place.
But he notes it also commonly denotes the utmost certainty of an event.
He gives some heavy scriptural examples to back this up, starting with God speaking to Abraham in Genesis 22.
God tells Abraham, "In multiplying, I will multiply thy seed."
Edwards points out that this ingemination implies two things simultaneously.
That God would certainly multiply his seed, without a shadow of a doubt.
And also that he would multiply it exceedingly to a massive, incalculable degree.
It covers both the absolute certainty and the vast scale.
The other example he uses is from the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2.
God warning Adam about the forbidden fruit. "In the day that thou eatest thereof, in dying thou shalt die."
In dying, thou shalt die. Edwards notes that this implies Adam should surely die, the absolute certainty of the punishment.
And also that he should die most terribly, utterly perishing.
Edwards is showing that this doubling of words covers almost all forms of strong speech.
It covers the utmost degree, great certainty, the strictness of a command, the earnestness of a request.
When we translate "let us go" going into our modern context, it requires a relentless consistency.
Edwards defines it very clearly.
He says the strength of the expression represents the earnestness of those making the proposal, their great engagedness in the affair.
Practically, it means they should be speedy, fervent, and constant in the duty.
Or, as he sums it up, that it should be thoroughly performed.
Thoroughly performed. That implies a massive mental and spiritual toll.
It is not a half-hearted attempt.
It is not a quick prayer before dinner or a passing thought during a morning commute.
Going means you are fully all in, maintaining a rapid pace, burning with fervency, and refusing to quit until the goal is achieved.
The linguistic intensity perfectly matches the theological weight of the request.
If the church is asking the sovereign Lord of hosts to manifest himself and revive the nations, that request cannot be made casually.
It requires the utmost degree of earnestness.
Up to this point, you might be wondering why Edwards is spending so much time dissecting Hebrew grammar, tracking ellipses, and mapping out the chronological sequence of Zechariah's prophecy.
It feels like an incredibly dense academic exercise.
But Edwards has a massive reveal waiting at the end of this exegesis.
All of this intense linguistic and theological analysis is building toward a very specific, real-world request.
He had a highly specific, practical agenda.
He outlines his final observation from the text.
The prophecy indicates this type of explicit, united union in prayer is acceptable to God and will be crowned with glorious success.
Having established that this is a biblical mandate, Edwards drops the historical catalyst for his entire discourse.
He introduces a document referred to as the memorial lately sent over into America from Scotland by a number of ministers there.
This is where the theology hits the pavement of the 18th century.
We have to understand the historical context here.
In the early 1740s, both Scotland and the American colonies had experienced waves of massive religious revivals.
What we now call the First Great Awakening.
You had men like George Whitefield crossing the Atlantic, preaching to thousands.
But by 1744, the intense emotional and spiritual fires were beginning to cool.
The revivals at places like Cambuslang and Kilsyth in Scotland were waning.
The thermal updraft was losing its heat.
Precisely.
A group of Scottish ministers, including men like William McCulloch and John Maclaurin, recognized this decline.
They wanted to sustain the movement.
So they drafted a proposal, a memorial, calling for a massive coordinated network of prayer.
They sent this physical document on a ship across the Atlantic to their American counterparts.
And what did this memorial propose?
It proposed the exact type of explicit union in extraordinary prayer that Edwards just spent his entire text defining and defending.
It is an absolute masterclass in rhetorical strategy.
Edwards essentially reverse-engineered his theological treatise to perfectly support the Scottish proposal.
He took a biblical prophecy, proved that it demands a specific, explicit, united agreement to pray fervently for revival.
And then turns to his audience and says, look, our brothers in Scotland have just sent us a document proposing we enter into a specific, explicit, united agreement to pray for revival.
Everything discussed previously was Edwards building an impenetrable, logically sound fortress.
The debate over synecdoche proved prayer is the specific required duty.
The analysis of God hiding proved we need to seek his manifest presence.
The ellipsis proved we need explicit, formal agreement.
The Hebrew grammar of ingemination proved we need intense fervency.
All of it was laying the groundwork to convince his American peers to sign on to this Scottish initiative.
He writes this theological fortress around the proposal so that rejecting the Scottish memorial feels tantamount to rejecting the clear prophetic command of Scripture.
He explicitly states his agenda for the rest of his discourse.
He says his special design is to persuade friends of Christ's kingdom to comply with the proposal and request made in that memorial.
He lays out his structural roadmap for how he will accomplish this persuasion in the rest of his book.
First, he promises a short historical account of the affair, drawn from letters and papers that came over from Scotland, providing the full transatlantic context.
Second, he will annex the actual memorial itself to the text, so everyone can read exactly what they are agreeing to sign.
Third, he will offer arguments and motives tending to induce compliance.
He will give them logical, theological, and historical reasons to say yes.
And lastly, he will make answers to some objections that might possibly be made against it.
He anticipates the pushback, whether it be without the formality of the agreement, the specific times proposed for prayer, or the theological validity of the enterprise.
And he prepares to systematically dismantle those objections.
It demonstrates how utterly serious he was about the mechanics of revival.
He believed that if God ordained united prayer as the means to bring about a glorious advancement of the church, then organizing that prayer was the most urgent, practical task at hand.
It was not enough to just hope a revival would happen. They had to explicitly agree to lay the tracks for it.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let us summarize the core mechanics Edwards has outlined.
We started by defining prayer as a highly specific action, the precise tool required, rather than a broad term for general Christian living.
We looked at the object of that prayer, which is seeking the literal manifestation of God himself, especially during eras when God actively withdraws the visible tokens of his grace.
We examined the chronological sequence of the expanding circle.
The Spirit initiates the burden in believers. They explicitly agree to pray. Their visible transformation creates a spiritual updraft that draws in unbelievers, and that pull eventually reaches the nations.
We parsed the mechanics of visible union, observing how the explicit agreement implied by the ellipsis acts like a formal, covenantal treaty to bind the will of the people when emotional zeal fades.
And we unpacked the intense linguistic demand of going in, going, the Hebrew ingemination requiring speedy, fervent, and relentless action.
All of this culminated in Edwards using his immense theological intellect to rally support for a real-world transatlantic prayer initiative.
I want to leave you with a final thought regarding the concept Edwards highlighted of God hiding himself during low states of the church.
We discussed how that divine withdrawal is meant to provoke a specific response from the believers.
If the biblical remedy to that withdrawal is an intense, united, explicit agreement to seek the Lord of hosts, what are the implications for individuals today who feel entirely isolated in their local context?
So many people look at the cultural landscape or even their own local congregations and feel like they are standing alone in a dry and thirsty land.
The idea of triggering a global awakening feels impossible.
But if the sequence Edwards outlines holds true, a massive shift does not require you to single-handedly change the culture.
It begins on a micro level.
How might the simple act of explicitly agreeing to seek God with just one other person creating that initial visible union shift, the momentum?
If two people decide to enter into a formal agreement to go in going, could that be the initial heat that creates the updraft?
It challenges us to consider who we might need to approach to make that explicit agreement.
If you want to see the updraft, you have to start by creating the heat.
Spot on. We will see you next time.